Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei is lost in the dimensional gap part 1. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Rias Gremory sat uncomfortably in class, attempting to distract herself from the thought that plagued her mind constantly. Issei was gone. Here she was trying to return to mundane life like everything wasn't completely different. How could she be expected to function and return to her previous routine without Issei Hyoudou in her life? Her heart tightened every time she thought of him, which was almost always, as Issei's disappearance, she hasn't given up on him yet, occupied her every waking thought. The moment of Issei's disappearance kept on replaying in her mind, on a never-ending repeat. Every time her mind had drifted off or she closed her eyes, all she could picture was Issei and Valley disappearing into the dimensional gap in the midst of their heavily anticipated clash. Neither had been since. Rias kept on waiting and waiting for Issei's return, but it never came. No longer her usually observant self, Rias was suddenly hit with the realization that something had changed in the dynamic of her class. She cast her eyes across the classroom in an attempt to work out what it was. She looked to Akeno on her left-hand side, in the seat along the same horizontal row as her, looking similarly distant and grief-stricken. This was not the root of this alter in the fabrics of the classroom. She directed her gaze to the other side of the classroom in an effort to locate what was bothering her. And Rias was met with her answer. A new male student. How had she missed his introduction? The loss of Issei was throwing her more of her game than she thought. This new classmate was by no means a bad-looking fellow. If her heart didn't belong to Issei, Rias would certainly find herself mildly attracted to this young man. He wasn't a pretty boy like Kiba, instead he had more of a rugged feel about him. He had long, dark curly hair that went to his shoulders, relatively pale skin and a thin beard that coated his chin and cheeks. He wore the regular school uniform. There was a familiarity about him that she couldn't put her finger on to try and work out why. He was sat in the seat in front of the seat directly to Ria's right, so she could see him, but he couldn't see her unless he went through the strain of turning around, which may risk a neck injury. He had a vacant look plastered across his face, with his mind clearly not focused on the lesson. From the movement of his jaw she realized that he was also chewing gum. The teacher's voice suddenly pierced through Ria's distracted thoughts when Rias heard the teacher shout, "Mr. Jin, I don't know how they did things at your old school, but here at Kuo Academy, we don't chew gum in class. And whilst I'm on the subject of what we don't accept here, we're not too keen on facial here either." Rias turned from the angry face of the teacher to the new student, Mr. Jin. Mr. Jin looked up at the teacher with a raised eyebrow, clearly annoyed at this teacher for embarrassing him in front of his new classmates. Rias expected him to say something, but instead, the teacher's facial expression completely changed and she moved on as if nothing had happened. This incident left Rias mildly surprised as she tried to work out why the teacher decided to drop things so easily. A similar incident occurred soon after. Mr. Jin returned to his daydreaming until he was rudely interrupted when the teacher tried to catch him out by asking him a question in the knowledge that he was clearly not paying attention, a classic teacher move in their arsenal of dirty tricks. Rias expected the new pupil to react in a distressed fashion and say something like I'm not sure, could you please repeat the question? But Mr. Jin kept his composure and again simply looked up at the teacher and, again, the teacher moved on as if nothing had happened. But this time Rias saw it. Or at least she thought she'd seen it. She believed she'd seen something at the very least, perhaps not it. But definitely something. Rias was more attentive this time and maintained her focus on Mr. Jin throughout the incident. When he looked up at the teacher and locked eyes with the teacher, a silver glint played across his livid, blue-gray eyes. The someone who had not fixed their gaze upon this young man would not have recognized this change in his eyes, or perhaps even noticed it at all, but Rias prided herself on her attention to detail in such matters. She was certain that something was afoot with this young man, and she was keen to find out what. She continued to stare at this newcomer in an attempt to uncover something else about him. Rias was then welcomed with quite the surprise when he risked straining his neck to turn around to her watchful gaze. Mr. Jin gave her a friendly smile and proceeded to wink at her before turning back around to face the front and return to his daydreaming state. Upon the culmination of the school day, Rias gathered herself and dragged herself to the usual meeting place of the Occult Research Club. She got there 10 or so minutes before the rest of the club so that she could assemble the necessary materials for her to assign set tasks to the members. As she entered the club room she was met by Azazel, again sitting in her chair. "This is a recurring habit that I would like for you to break out of. That is my chair, get out of it. Please," Rias said to him. "And good afternoon to you too, Rias," Azazel responded, ignoring her instruction. "I have got a word of a mission that your brother would like for you to complete with your team." Rias nodded to him, "Go on." "There is a stray devil he would like for you to deal with. This devil has proved somewhat problematic over the years, with every devil sent to deal with the devil failing. Sugestions has recently got word that this devil has now found its way to your territory and has deemed it only fair to allow you and your team to have a pop at catching him, as Issei informed her. So no pressure, he added with a wry smile. Great, Rias replied with a forced smile, willing herself to remain perky and witty in such dark times. The other members of the Occult Research Club flooded in, all with a sense of sorrow in their step, all also battling with feelings of regret and sadness over the loss of Issei. They sat themselves down on the seats before Ria's desk, of which remained occupied by Azazel, and proceeded to all look down at their feet with glum expressions fixed across their faces. Hello all, Rias began, I know that we're all struggling at present, but we have to try and remain dutiful. We have been set a task by my brother, of which I hope you feel up to completing. What's the point? Kaneko responded solemnly. Excuse me? Rias found herself crying out. What's the point of continuing like nothing's happened? How can we be expected to go on as normal when Issei's gone? Kaneko replied. He was the glue that held us together and drew us in, Akeno added. Rias breathed in and out to compose herself and finally issued a response to her comrades. I'm not expecting you to act like nothing's happened or to go back to normal. We've all been deeply affected by the loss of Issei, myself included, but we've got to carry on and do our jobs, because it's what Issei would want us to do. The best way for us to pass the time whilst we wait for his return is to make sure we continue to do what's expected of us so that Issei doesn't have to return to a club in tatters. That's if he ever returns, Zenobia muttered with pain etched into her words. We can't think like that. If we do, we'll never be able to function. We have to try and remain positive until we know something with certainty. We just need to have a little patience, Rias said, trying to drum up positivity in others whilst covering up her own feelings. The president is right, we need to continue to do what Issei would want us to do in his absence and keep on doing our jobs. Come on, guys, said Kiba, issuing a rallying call. The rest of the club's faces began to perk up a bit as they nodded in agreement. Preparations then began for their departure as they drew out plans for this elusive stray devil. Are you sure this big house is where we can find the stray? Roswas asked Rias. This is definitely the address Azazel gave me, whether it's correct or not remains to be seen, Rias responded. How can a stray devil live in such an absolute mansion when he never stays in one place for long? Zenobia queried rhetorically. The Occult Research Club stood just outside a towering mansion of a home, which looked like it could house tens of people in it, with each inhabitant getting a fairly large room for themselves. The house was placed on the outskirts of town, away from the majority of the residents of the settlement. How many devils are we expecting to find in this place? Asked Kiba, clearly amazed by the size of this place. One, Rias answered. So how should we go about getting in? Piped up Kaneko. There doesn't appear to be any fence blocking us from getting into the garden of the house, so perhaps going in through the back door, lol, would be the best course of action. Akeno proposed. Agreed, said Rias. They tiptoed round his house for they did not wish to alert the rogue devil to their presence entering into the garden and coming before a large green garage-like door at the back of the house. Rias nodded to Kaneko, who stepped up and proceeded to rip the large barrier from its hinges. As the door was lifted up, they were met with a dark but still visible room. The room seemed to fill the entirety of the ground floor of this building, encompassing a living area, a dining area and a kitchen. They looked across the room to the far end of the house where they saw two faces looking back at them with startled expressions. The resident of this house appeared to be in the midst of paying a pizza delivery boy, who was particularly shocked by the sudden entrance of the Occult Research Club. The owner of the home turned to them and told them. Give me 1 second, I'll be right with you. In fact, could you please go back outside and come back in when I tell you? I had a bit planned for when you got here, but you took longer than expected and I got bored. And hungry. I promise I'll still be here when you come back in. Scout's honor, although I was never a scout. Sure, Rias said, particularly surprised by this incident. This was definitely a new one in her experience of dealing with stray devils. Her and the club members retreated back out of the garage-like door and waited just out of view. Okay, come back in, the owner of the home shouted to them. As they re-entered the house, this time with less of an entrance, they noticed that neither the resident of the address or the pizza boy were at the front door. In the center of the room was a black leather desk chair, in which the homeowner sat in with his back turned to them. He spun the chair round to face them. Oh shit, as the chair continued to turn beyond directly facing them. For fuck's sake, that's completely ruined what I had planned, as I put too much spin in my turning of the chair. Anyway, I've been expecting you, said Mr. Jin. I've been expecting you, said Mr. Jin, with his right arm resting on the armrest and his raised right hand cupping his chin, whilst his right leg crossed over his left. Wait, I know this guy, he's just joined my class at Kuo Academy, Rias said abruptly as she suddenly recognized him. Unlike in their first meeting, Mr. Jin was no longer dressed in the uniform of the Kuo Academy. Instead, he wore a black suit with the lowest button done up, revealing a black shirt with the top button undone. His long, dark curls were now in a ponytail. "Oh, hi Rias, nice to see you again," Mr. Jin said, raising his other hand to wave at Rias, accompanying this with a friendly smile. "How lucky I am to have such beautiful guests visiting my lowly home. I would definitely shag all of you if given the opportunity, both females and males. At least I would if I swung both ways, but sadly I do not." "Who the fuck is this creep?" whispered Kaneko, expressing a reaction that mirrored that of her comrades, who found themselves rather weirded out by this individual. "I should probably introduce myself. My name is Taro Jin, or Jin Taro if you want it in the Japanese way. I'm not phased either way. Don't worry, I know who all of you are," Taro Jin informed them. Looking upon him and figuring that he didn't seem like much of an adversary, Rias decided that she may as well try and go about this in a peaceful way. "Mr. Jin, we have been sent to capture you so that you may pay for your crimes." "Really? What a shame, I really thought we could become friends, and I don't much like having to hit girls," Taro responded. "So you're not going to turn yourself in peacefully?" Rias asked, wanting confirmation before she instructed her team to attack. "No, I'm afraid," replied Taro. "Very well then. Occult Research Club. Assemble," Rias cried out as the battle began. Akeno initiated the fight by sending a bolt of lightning in Taro Jin's direction. The bolt seemed to be right on target, but with the movement of Taro's hand, the bolt went through a teleportation seal thing. "I'd duck if I was you," Taro informed them. "What?" the Occult Research Club said in unison, before ducking at the last minute to avoid the bolt of lightning that had suddenly came shooting out from behind them. Taro again raised his hand, and the bolt disappeared through a seal, but this time it did not return. They turned to him in surprise. "What? This is my house, I don't want it blowing stuff up in here," he responded. "Where did it go?" Zenobia questioned. "No idea, probably to someone I dislike. I'm afraid that there are too many of those for me to try and pinpoint exactly who though," replied Taro. With Taro seemingly distracted, Akeno attempted to again muster an attack. Taro noticed this and vanished from his chair, suddenly appearing behind her. Now, I can't be having you destroying my lovely home," he said to her, before tapping both her arms with seals appearing. Akeno's arms then disappeared. "What? Where did my arms go? Oh my god, am I now armless? How am I to muster up lightning?" she cried out. "Calm down, you still have arms, they've just been," Taro paused, misplaced. "They've just been moved elsewhere as they're proving to be quite bothersome. Your body is still functioning as if they're in their normal place, there's no need to worry, your arms will return in due course, eventually. Probably. At least, I think they will. I'm not normally here when it happens as I've made my escape, but I'm pretty certain they will." "What?" Akeno bellowed in disbelief. "Wow, up close you're even prettier. You, my dear, are definitely one of my favorites," continued Taro, ignoring her cries. Akeno blushed in response to this, but then remembered what was going on and shouted fuck off. The rest of the club rallied to attack. Kiba and Zenobia came at Taro from both sides. Taro teleported and appeared a foot behind his initial spot, waiting for Kiba and Zenobia to meet in the center. When they did, he tapped both their hands and, with a verbal poof on Taro's part, their hands and swords disappeared. They stared at where their hands had been in disbelief, trying to work out what had just happened. Irina charged at Taro, her holy sword swing like a phallic object. As she swung her sword down upon him, his left shoulder disappeared, the area where her sword would have made contact. She saw something in the periphery of her vision to the left of her. Irina glanced to the left and saw the missing left shoulder of Taro, who then materialized alongside the shoulder. Taro put his right arm around her shoulders, his hand resting on her right shoulder blade. "An angel. Wow, and so pretty, a pure and untainted flower in so many ways, not just in virginity," Taro said. "Get your hand off of me, you wretch," she roared through gritted teeth. Ignoring her, Taro continued. "It would be a shame for someone to defile such a being," his eyes lighting up with lust. "What?" Irina bellowed. "I'm just joshing around, but if I ever decide that I'm loving Angel instead, you'll be the first one I go to, my dear," Taro told her with a smile. He then brought across his left hand and tapped her left arm in unison, with the right hand lifting slightly to tap the shoulder blade it lay on. And within a split second, her arms too vanished into thin air. Taro then skipped away from Irina, laughing to himself at how he'd toyed with her. Next came Roswas, who attempted to gather the winds to strike this foe, but in the blink of an eye her hands met a similar fate to Akeno's, rendering her attacks useless or at least misguided. She screamed in dismay at the sight of there being nothingness in the space where her hands should be. Kaneko came up behind an unsuspecting Taro and smacked him round the head with all her might. "Ow, fuck," he yelled out, "you bitch. If you weren't so young I'd slice and dice you, sending your body parts to a million different corners of the world. But in your youthful naivety, I shall forgive you." Taro turned and gripped Kaneko's hands and looked into her eyes, with that silver flicker again playing across his livid. "I looked up what blue-gray is called, I'm using this word from now on. Deal with it, eyes." She gasped and ran away. Asia chased after her, crying out for Kaneko to come back and tell her what's wrong. "What did you do to her?" Rias demanded. "Relax," Taro began, "I just made her mildly attracted to me, making any potential attack null, as she wouldn't want to inflict real pain on someone she fancies. Don't worry, it's only temporary. I didn't look deeply into her eyes enough to make it permanent." "Oh, Gasper," Rias instructed. "But I'm scared," he wailed in response. Taro turned to him and started to tap his left foot in expectation and impatience. "Gasper, come on, pull yourself together, man," shouted Rias. "Oh, stop shouting at me," he cried, but finally mustered up the courage to freeze Taro, stopping him from pulling any more teleportation tricks. Rias flew over to where Taro found himself frozen. She landed gently in front of him and raised her right arm with a crimson ball of destruction appearing in her outstretched hand. "You've had enough fun, Taro-jin, but I'm afraid that the fun is over for you at least. If you aren't willing to comply and let me take you to the necessary authorities without any fighting back, I'm afraid I may have to obliterate you from existence." "Obliterate me? From existence? I don't much like the sound of that," Taro began, weighing up his options, "but I also don't fancy my chances with the authorities you speak of, as I've caused them quite a bit of grief in the past. Is there a third option?" "No," Rias replied bluntly. "I see," said Taro, locking eyes with Rias and smiling. Rias anticipated his next move and swiftly raised her free hand to cover her eyes, blocking out his eye ability. "Not this time," she informed him. "Brat, time for plan B," Taro responded. "Would it be possible for me to join the little squad you have here? I understand you recently lost a member. I believe I could adequately replace him in some respects. Your team was pretty sloppy today, so having someone who isn't overwhelmed with grief may help you in future conflict. Not all of your enemies will be quite so focused on the entertainment factor of the battle." "A sensible suggestion," Rias began. "Thank you. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline your offer." "Oh, I see, may I ask why?" "We have no vacancies left in our roster, I'm afraid. Could I not just join in an unofficial, non-chess piece-based capacity? Like the Angel?" "No. Pretty please. Why do you want to join the team and how do we know you won't betray us?" "I'm sick of running and being forever on the move, I like it here and I like you guys, you've got a bit about you," Taro responded. "If you like, I'll sign a binding agreement or some form of contract to promise that I won't." It's a tempting offer, but I remain dubious. "How about on a trial basis, just to see how things go? This way, you have someone on their game whilst you recover from your loss." "Fine," Rias replied, "let's see how things go," giving him a forced smile. "Result," said Taro, smiling beaming back at her. The Occult Research Club gathered in the meeting room for their daily assigning of tasks after school. Azazel was, this time, not present, with Rias now able to finally occupy her chair. Before her were the two sofas that seated her club members. On the sofa to her right sat all 8 of the regular servants all bunched onto one sofa, making for a very cramped living space. On the parallel sofa facing them sat Taro-jin, stretching his arms out across the back of the chair, with a wide smile plastered across his face. "You know I don't bite, guys," he said to those on the other sofa with a nervous laugh. They responded by shooting daggers from their eyes at him. "Damn, tough crowd," Taro muttered to himself. "Good afternoon, club members. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our newest club member. Taro-jin. I know he might seem like a dick and basically is one, but try to be friendly to him," Rias instructed. "Thanks for the kind words and support," Taro said to her, giving her a thumbs up. "Our first order of business is to sort out our present living arrangements," Rias began. "We currently reside in the home of the Hyoudou family. Whilst they remain kind to us in the absence of their son, of whom we are unable to give a truthful answer on the whereabouts of, there is an air of awkwardness surrounding the situation. Does anyone have any suggestions on how we can relieve this awkwardness or temporarily move away whilst we await Issei's return?" After an initial minute of silence, Taro piped up. "You could come and live with me?" "I'm sorry," Rias responded. "You saw my house, it's massive. There's definitely enough space for more people," said Taro. "Whilst that is a tempting offer, I'd rather we didn't resort to squatting, in the same way that I assume you are," replied Rias. "I'm not a squatter. I own the place. How can a lone boy afford such a house? When I need money I convince rich men to give me money with my eye technique. A particularly wealthy and generous gentleman donated the money for me to buy my house. So you resorted to thievery. Zenobia weighed in, we will have no part in your sinful activity. I prefer to think of myself as being like Robin Hood. I take from the rich and give to the poor with, in this case, the poor being me, Taro retorted. So you only rob from bad rich men? Asia said, her face lighting up at the prospect of this fellow not being as dickish as she initially thought. No, not quite, it tends to be based on whoever I can find. But I'll start only robbing from bad rich men from now on, if you'd like, Taro responded. There'll be no more stealing of any sort on your part, Taro, barked Rias, but with a softer tone she then said, but you have managed to convince me. We will try out living at your place in the short term, as it seems like the simplest solution. Great, Taro replied. After finding a solution to the first order of business, Rias moved on to the usual things, assigning tasks to her club members and sending them away. By the end of this, only Akeno and Taro remained. Before I send you two on your way, we need to sort out the binding contract Taro agreed to, said Rias, and I'd also like to discuss Taro's powers. What would you like to know? Taro asked. Your powers are essentially more developed versions of the basic powers of devils. Rias hesitated, most devils are able to teleport themselves from place to place, thinking back to Issei's inability to teleport in his early beginnings, but you've taken the teleporting one step further. In a similar ilk, many high-class devils can bend people to their will, but your ability seems like a far more developed version. Is your power set basically just more developed versions of basic techniques? Perhaps, he responded. Rias tried to hold back her frustration at this inadequate response, and you demonstrated knowledge of my club that goes far beyond what most devils, let alone strays, know of us. How? I know things. What things? Now if I told you that I'd have. Let me guess, you'd have to kill us. Rias interrupted, with frustration etched across her face. No, if I told you that I'd have no air of mystery surrounding me and I'd lose some my sex appeal. Sex appeal? Indeed. Akeno gets it, I can tell that she'd love a bit of this, said Taro, gesturing to Akeno on the sofa facing him, what can I say? The looks, the charm, it just works. Before Rias could respond, Akeno weighed in. I would not love a bit of this thank you very much, Akeno informed him angrily, before turning to Rias. Now Rias, what do you need me in here for? I'd like to get away from him as soon as possible, with Akeno turning towards Taro to glare at him. I love you too, he said with a friendly smile, I mean how could I not? You're amazing. Our babies would be beautiful. And that goes for you too, Rias. You make it very difficult for people to like you, Rias informed him with a bored expression across her face, and then turned back to Aneko, I need your help binding him to a contract of sorts. Very well, I'll do anything to stop him getting up to no good, replied Akeno. Does that include me getting up to no good with either of you, if you know what I mean? Taro asked. Whilst, sadly, I do know what you mean, I'm not going to grace that question with a response, Rias said tiredly. She was already beginning to sense that letting this delinquent into her club was going to be a bad idea. Don't hate the player, hate the game, retorted Taro. Rias ignored Taro and began to speak. Akeno, I need you to help me put a binding sigil on him that will inflict an immense amount of pain upon him if he goes out of line. Akeno giggled, that sounds just like my sort of thing. This will be fun. How will this sigil be placed on me exactly? Taro inquired. Like a tattoo, but infused with magic, Rias responded. The tattoo? No, I'm good actually. Can't I just give you my word on a man's honor? A tattoo sounds a bit needless and painful. What, is it our tough little player afraid of needles? Akeno laughed. No, I just don't care for them. Your word means nothing, you are no man, and you have no honor. None of those things will suffice, Rias informed him. Pretty please? Taro begged. Stop being a baby, if you don't act like a little bitch, whilst we give you the sigil, Akeno, and I will give you a kiss, Rias told him. Deal, replied Taro, his tone becoming far more eager. Later that evening, the company of the Occult Research Club moved into Taro's home. Once bedrooms had been assigned and after the rejection of Taro's offer for the girls to all share his room, they gathered in Taro's living area. Rias had insisted on the room being arranged to match her office at the club's meeting headquarters. On this occasion, Taro was joined on his sofa by Akeno, who had found a new form of amusement. After having the sigil placed on his left wrist, he had taken to holding it tightly with his right hand and looking at it with tears in his eyes, trying to hold back the pain. Akeno had found it rather amusing to try and poke his left wrist, enjoying how he reacted by crying out and whimpering. Come on, let me poke it, stop being a baby, it doesn't hurt that much, she taunted him. No, stop it, Akeno, he wailed, which she responded to by giggling. After finally breaking through his defenses to give his wrist a strong poke, he replied by crying out, ow, shit, you bitch. Which she found intensely funny and almost fell on the floor in her laughing state. After wiping away his tears, which he initially tried to do using Akeno's skirt but was faced with a strong objection and an even harder poke to his wrist, which set him back a bit, Taro turned to Rias and said, "I believe I'm on 2 kisses for being big brave boy." "No, you were a little bitch throughout." "No kisses for you," Rias responded with a wide grin. Taro wept even more after this. "I have been robbed," he cried. "You shouldn't have worried about losing your air of mystery taking away your sex appeal, as this performance has certainly done it," Akeno told him. "Really, because it seems to have drawn you in?" Taro replied. In response, Akeno punched him where a man would rather not be punched. "Interesting choice of where to put your hand," he wheezed, with his battle against crying becoming even more intense. As the night drew in, plans for slumber had to be forgotten after Rias was alerted to the presence of a demonic creature in her territory. She gathered her troops and gave them their instructions. "Gasper, I want you to try and freeze this creature to allow us the best chance of dealing with it. My sources tell me it's a big boy," Rias said, giving Gasper his instructions. "Yes, ma'am," Gasper replied. Wait. Hold on just 1 second. Why is there a boy dressed as a girl here? When did he get here?" Taro interrupted. "You didn't know I was here, a part of the group. But I was the one that froze you, allowing us to capture you," Gasper cried, bursting into tears, for he is a sensitive soul. "Sorry, mate, but I generally only notice females, particularly girls, as attractive as these," Taro informed him, "and men of whom I view as competition, like the pretty boy over there," pointing at Kiba. "It's rude to point," Kiba reminded him blankly. "Geez, is there ever a moment when you don't cause an issue, Taro?" Rias said, again feeling tired from having to put up with him. "I'll have to get back to you," Taro replied. Finally able to return to the task at hand, the Occult Research Club found their way to an old warehouse, the supposed home of the stray creature. "I suppose this is one of the only places that's tall enough to house such a creature," Ross proposed. "The best route of entry is to go around and go through the backdoor entrance," Rias informed them. "Way," Taro laughed, "backdoor entrance? You might actually be worse than Issei," Kaneko muttered, holding her head in her hands. "Shut up," Rias told him bluntly. "You're so hot when you're angry with me," Taro told her. Rias ignored him and led the team to the backdoor entrance of the warehouse. The door was locked. Rias gestured to Kaneko to come over and bust the door down. Kaneko came over and, with a surge of power, smashed the door open. "Okay, let's go," Rias whispered to her team. "Good idea, let's whisper. Just in case the loud bang that probably woke up half the town hasn't alerted the creature to our presence," said Taro. They entered into a pitch-black room. Whilst their eyes adjusted, all they could sense was movement around them, based on hearing rustling in the background. "Oh no, I'm scared. I don't like the dark," Gasper whispered, tears flooding his eyes. "Stop being a little bitch and grow a pair, you're meant to be a boy," Taro shouted at him, which only proved to cause Gasper to cry even more. Taro's feelings of guilt, however, were interrupted by a low growl in the background. "What was that?" Asia asked. "My stomach. Sorry, I forgot to eat before we left," Taro replied. Then an even louder growl filled the room. "I can categorically confirm that wasn't my stomach that time," Taro informed them. Out from the darkness came a long than it is wide, so phallic-shaped piece of flesh that sent Asia, Kaneko, Gasper and Arena flying through the air. It was a tail. Obviously, what else would it be? A penis. Get your mind out of the gutter, please. Just as the club's compatriots seemed to be heading for a mighty thump against the wall, they disappeared and appeared firmly on the ground on the opposite side of where the group stood to where they'd been sent flying. "Don't worry, girls," Taro began, "and Gasper, I've got your backs. I've got everyone's backs," finishing by giving them a wave. The creature hurtled through the darkness at them, its teeth bared. This wretched being was quite the menacing sight. It looked like a giant Komodo dragon, with it being the size of 3 elephants, lengthwise but twice as menacing, due to it possessing crocodile-like mouth, which they could only imagine what hid inside. But their imagination was soon given answers when its jaws opened wide as it threw itself in their direction, showing off a full set of sharp and pointy teeth that looked like they could pierce through your body with little effort. The club members thought they'd have enough time to ready themselves for the beast, but they were wrong. It possessed an unnatural speed for its size and proportions. As its open lower jaw attempted to scoop them into its mouth, many found themselves closing their eyes and waiting for the inevitable crunch. But it never came. Instead, as they finally gathered the strength to open their eyes, they found the welcome sight of the creature being on the other side of the room. Upon the realization of what had happened, they looked at Taro with admiration somehow slipping into their gaze. To reiterate, I've got your backs. But please, come on, get your shit together, people. I'm not a one-man team, I can't do this alone, Taro said, clasping his clenched left fist into his opened right hand in an attempt to be motivational. And it seemed to work. Rias club members found a new source of strength in this close shave with a gruesome death. They unearthed a new sense of courage in this time of adversity and found themselves prepared to take this monster head on. The sword wielders led the charge. They drove their blades into the sizes of the beast and the creature replied with screams of pain. Every time the monster tried to swipe them away with one of its massive feet, they were teleported to the other side of the creature, allowing them to attack a different side, inflicting it with pain on multiple fronts. Hineko followed suit and used her low center of gravity to move swiftly under the beast, attacking it from below, where it was only able to swipe for her blindly. Whenever the creature's wild swipes got too close for comfort, Taro teleported her elsewhere to a safer location. Jasper continued to cower in fear, unable to focus enough to freeze only the beast. Both the loss of Issei and the sharp tongue of Taro had resulted in a loss of confidence on his part. And the terrifying qualities of what faced them also didn't help his nerves. Akeno and Rias took to the air to provide a more long-distance method of combat. They shot beams of lightning at the creature, causing it a great deal of distress. It particularly took exception to one of Akeno's lightning bolts hitting it right in the face. Diverting its intention from that which was on the ground, it raised itself so that it now stood on its hind legs, raising itself to Akeno's level. Whilst those on the ground continued to strike at its lower legs and tail, it ignored them and gave all its attention to Akeno, moving towards her, its eyes transfixed upon her. Rias attempted to divert attention away from Akeno with various elemental attacks, but it maintained its focus on the girl who hit it in the head. Rias decided this was her moment to intervene, but Taro, who was just to the side of her, raised his across her to stop her. "Wait, anything you do might catch Akeno in the crossfire, I've got this." Rias nodded and gestured for him to do what was necessary. Akeno tried to get the monster to back away by firing lightning bolts at it, but it proceeded without caution, and however much she threw at it, the monster remained intent on getting to her, never breaking from its step. It wasn't as quick on 2 legs as it was on 4, but its low pace and heavy steps made it all the more menacing a prospect for Akeno. "Oh, shit," she cried out as she began to feel helpless. The monster drew closer and opened its jaws wide before lunging at Akeno in an attempt to swallow her whole. Akeno screamed and closed her eyes, again finding herself waiting for the inevitable crunch and sweet release of death, but again it never came. "Have you got something in your eye? You seem pretty intent on keeping them closed," a familiar voice said to her. Akeno turned and saw she had returned to the safety of the other side of the warehouse, alongside Rias and Taro, who was gripping her back. "That was a close one for the both of us there. By the time I'd made it to you, I almost found myself swallowed too," Taro began, "for I deemed it necessary that I teleport over in person, as I find my abilities more predictable when I'm teleporting myself." "Thank you," she said quietly, blushing. "Don't worry, baby doll, as I've said previously. I've got everyone's backs. In your case, quite literally," Taro told her, gesturing to the hand that was still on her back. Akeno couldn't help but laugh at this. "Have you left it there just so you could make that quip?" He nodded, "Of course. My dedication to humor is unrivaled." "Now, Akeno, let's obliterate this fucker," Rias said with a determined smile. "Yes, let's," replied Akeno, with a matching smirk. They turned to the beast and shouted to their comrades to back away. No more pissing around, they had weakened it enough to make one powerful strike enough to eliminate this foe. Rias and Akeno unleashed a great burst of power upon this creature. The monster let loose a bloody curdling scream, but this was its last action. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained where it once stood but ashes. "Yes, go Team Taro," Taro cried in jubilation. "That's not what we're called," Rias informed him. "It is now," Taro informed her. Rias looked across the living room and towards her newest member, glowing with a new sense of pride. No longer was he sat alone, but instead amongst his new peers, finally a part of the group and not on the outskirts. They no longer look at him with disdain as the one who made fools of them whilst objectifying them, but as a teammate who provided them with cover and moral support when they needed it. "Gasper, I'd like to apologize to you for my comments earlier," Taro said to Gasper. "I shouldn't have been so rude to you. I know what you've gone through, both in the long term and immediate past, in terms of what you've lost, and yet I thought it right to be cruel to you." "Oh, well, it's alright, Taro," Gasper replied shyly. No, it is not. I need to make this up for you. I have been postulating ways to help you get more confident, and I believe I have come up with a situation," Taro told Gasper. "Wearing girls' clothes makes you feel more comfortable, doesn't it? Well, I have used this logic to come to this conclusion. I want you to try wearing these pair of high heels," said Taro, pulling out a shoebox from under the sofa. "How exactly will this help his confidence?" asked Kiba, a doubter. "It's just a theory at present, try them on, and let's see how you feel," said Taro. He handed the box to Gasper, who slowly opened the box and pulled the heels out. He laid them out on the floor, where he slipped out of his present shoes and slipped his feet into the heels. "Try walking in them," Taro instructed. Asper did so, almost falling over at first, but Kaneko caught his arm and pushed him back upright. He continued with his attempts, eventually developing a system to it and becoming more able to walk in his shoes. "Yeah, I do feel strangely more confident in these," Gasper said. "It is as I expected," said Taro. "High-heeled shoes are often considered to be for those who are confident enough to wear them, and for those who feel more confident when wearing them, perhaps because it allows them to stand a couple inches taller." Rias held her head in her hands at this incident. Whilst he may finally be gaining acceptance from the group, he still maintains the same character flaws. Rias drew her mind back to when she first laid eyes upon him in class. She remembered the feeling of familiarity she had regarding him, which she still hadn't shaken off. She felt that they'd met before, but she couldn't put her finger on when. The name Taro-jin meant nothing to her. Regardless, there were still things that left her uneasy regarding Taro, and she needed to uncover why. At least, uneasiness was the feeling she thought she had regarding him. The group began to disperse and return to their night chambers. As Taro got up to do likewise, he found a hand wrap around his arm and pull him back down. He turned to find that this hand belonged to a nervous-looking Akeno. "May I help you?" he asked her. "No, you've helped me more than enough, and I've still not really thanked you for it," Akeno replied. "No thank yous is necessary, making sure that you're still alive so that I get to see your beautiful face and figure is more than enough, my dear." Akeno blushed at this. They were alone now, everyone else had returned to their rooms. "I'd just like to properly say thank you for saving my life. I'm not at my best currently, and that almost proved costly, but you're the reason I'm still here right now. In spite of your flaws, you're not a bad guy," said Aneko, who then leapt across the sofa to hug Taro. Taro grimaced. "Oh my days, I can feel her tits pressing against me." "Stay calm, Taro, you pride yourself on your compass disposition. Don't get a boner, don't get a. Is that your gun or are you just happy to see me?" Akeno whispered into his ear seductively. He grew. "Well, it can't be my gun, as I had my gun license suspended after I shot a guy in the ankle after I'd had my first alcoholic beverage." He looked at me funny, you see. "It was a particularly sad moment as I lost 2 recently acquired items that day, my gun and my fake ID. A very sorry state of affairs, I must say," Taro informed her. Akeno chuckled at this and then kissed him on the cheek before getting up and making her way to the staircase. "Good night, Taro," and with that she proceeded up the stairs and was gone. Yes, it has been a very good night," Taro murmured to himself. Taro stared up at his bedroom ceiling, holding on to the lingering memory of his previous interaction with Akeno. Who knew that just telling a girl she was clearly gagging for you would actually make them start gagging for you? It's like reverse psychology. If only I'd uncovered this earlier in my life. His trail of thought was interrupted by a knock on his door. He reluctantly got out of his bed and dragged himself to the door. He opened the door to find the welcome sight of Rias Gremory in her nightgown. "Nice." "Hello, Taro," Rias began, "may I come in?" Taro nodded and stepped out of the doorway, giving her entry into his room. She strolled in, with Taro closing the door behind her, and she sat herself on the edge of his bed. "Come, sit with me," she said to him, gesturing to the space next to her on the edge of his bed. After he sat down and turned his head towards her, she began to speak. "I'd like to start off by thanking you for your efforts. You galvanized an out-of-sorts team and gave us the fighting strength to win this battle. It was very pleasing for me to see that you seem to have finally been accepted by the rest of the club." Issei gave everyone a sense of protection, as he always seemed to pull it out of the bag. "You seem to have gone some way towards restoring this feeling, even if your style is more defensive than Issei's heavily offensive way of going into combat. However, there are 2 questions I'd like to ask you that I need answers to." "Ask away," Taro replied. "The first question relates to when we apprehended you. Since meeting us you have made the bold claim that you know things. When I told Gasper to freeze you hesitated and watched on in anticipation. For your bold claim to have merit, surely you must have known what his power set is, yet you didn't teleport. Furthermore, even if you didn't know his power set, surely my instruction for him to something was enough of a prompt for you to move, but you remained, standing in one place like a statue. Which brings me to my question, were you holding back when we captured you?" "Yes," Taro replied bluntly. "Why?" Now, you only get 2 questions, your words, not mine. Is this really the second question you wish to ask me?" Rias groaned with frustration. "No, I have another question I'd like to ask you too." "Well, what's more important then? The why question or this other one?" "If you're lucky, maybe I'll be able to answer both questions in one," Taro responded. "If you're about to ask the question I think you are, then you'll get an answer to both," he added. "Have we met before? When I first saw you in class I felt a sense of familiarity regarding you. Was this feeling misplaced or have we met before?" Rias demanded. "Bingo, that was the question we wanted," Taro said with a smirk. "And, yes, we have met before. Over the years I have adopted many names in my attempts to escape the grasps of exorcists, fallen angels, the Chaos Brigade and devils. But my first name, my original name, was Taro Takushimono. I hope that rings a bell with you. It did. Taro Takushimono was the first person she ever approached about becoming one of her servants and the only person to reject her offer. Rias came to him as he fled his home in the wake of his parents' assassination. The Takushimono family were made up of generations of leading devil generals, well-regarded military tacticians. Taro Takushimono's father, Hose, was one of those in line to become a leading devil after the Great War, but instead he and his wife found himself to one of the first casualties of the developing Chaos Brigade. Their son escaped but still pursued, and Rias came to him to offer salvation, but he rejected the offer. At the time, I felt a deep mistrust for my fellow devils, as devils had murdered my parents, hence why I rejected your offer. Since uncovering the truth regarding this matter, that it was by a separate group of devils, I have deeply regretted my decision. I have spent many a night thinking about what could have been if I had accepted your offer. I grew tired of running from those who wished to stop a stray devil causing mischief as a means to a living, and those who wished to just plain eliminate devils. I came here with a set plan of becoming part of your team, as I should have years ago. I held back so that you could capture me, but I did enough to allow you to see that I was worthy of being part of your squad. Rias found herself welling up at this tale, but still felt some resentment towards him for having the audacity to reject her. You were beautiful back then, but I had no idea you'd blossom into something so amazing and develop such a fantastic set of breasts. If I'd had that knowledge then I definitely wouldn't have rejected your offer. If I'd known who you go on to recruit I definitely would not have. Pretty girls like Akeno, Kaneko, Asia, Zenobia, Roswis, and Arena. And now that they don't hate me anymore, they seem like great girls too. They have a great pair of personalities in both senses of the word when referring to a woman. Who knows what could have become of me if I'd accepted the offer. I could have been your husband. I am a pure-blooded devil from a well-respected family after all, or, even better, by now I might have a harem. Ria's heart sank at this statement as memories of Issei came flooding in. She couldn't help but smile through the tears. I know that I'm a cunt, Taro added. Yes, you are a bit, Rias replied with a smile. But I've always wanted to be your cunt, said Taro. Wait, no, that came out wrong, with Taro becoming rather sheepish. Rias laughed at this and appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. This is going to be difficult. I need to break from my usual character and get really emotionally deep. Here goes, Taro thought to himself before turning back to Rias to speak. For me, Rias Gremory, you are the one that got away in a sense and presently my life's biggest regret. To hold you close tonight, I'd wait for life. And with those beautiful words, Ria's heart melted. She lunged at Taro and kissed him passionately. Who knew that getting in touch with your feelings was a surefire way to make a girl crave you? Again, if only I'd know sooner in life. I'm so sorry, Taro, that you've had to spend your life on the run. I should have come back for you, but I let my ego get in the way. How has the thought never crossed my mind that the loss of your parents at the hands of devils caused a deep mistrust of them? Oh, how sorry I am, Rias cried, pulling him into her bosom in a deep hug. No, it's alright. Like myself at the time, you were a child, and such things rationale was beyond the simple mind of a child, Taro responded, pulling Rias in closer to him and his face deeper into her breasts. This was exactly the kind of reward he wanted for breaking out of character and losing his normally light-hearted manner. Rias spent the night with him in his bed, allowing him to not have to wait for life to get the opportunity to hold her close tonight, unaware of the unoriginality of his words. Google it, with Rias wrapped tightly in Taro's arms, whose hands may have accidentally strayed 1 or 2 times. With Taro emphasizing the accidentally each time. Rias forced herself to overcome her guilt regarding Issei over this. She wasn't willing to accept he was gone for good, but she knew she needed to move on. Maybe she could have a harem of her own too. She smiled at this thought as she was swept over by sleep. That would be nice. Taro woke up to the most wondrous of sights upon one's first waking breasts. His jaw dropped lower than his ball sack at this vision of ecstasy. Oh, what a beautiful morning, oh what a beautiful day, I've got a wonderful feeling, everything's going my way. Taro found himself accidentally humming this, as well as thinking it, inadvertently waking Rias up. Her eyes fluttered open to the sight of him crying tears of joy. Morning, Taro, why are you crying? She asked him sympathetically. Oh, nothing, it's just that's it's such a beautiful morning, he replied. She glanced across to the window to see that rain was pouring down, whilst the sky was a grim grey color. No, it's not, she informed him. It is from where I'm looking, he replied, a jitter in his voice as his weeping became heavier, his vision transfixed on her bosom. Taro, my eyes are up here. Yes, dear, you are someone who's naturally beautiful in the morning. What? 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 Okay, now it's just you saying what over and over again to draw focus away from the fact you weren't paying attention to what I was saying, Rias said, reprimanding him. I apologize, I was a little bit distracted, Taro responded, by your tits. Yes, I know. Oh, it wasn't clear. She sighed, you really are very silly at times. She kissed him on the cheek and proceeded to get out of bed, and Taro, darling, you appear to have a nosebleed. Hello all, Rias began, after our recent performances on past missions, I think that we are in dire need of another journey away for training. Various groans echoed throughout the room. The prospect of another grueling training trip was an intimidating prospect. However, Taro, in his ignorance, interpreted this message in an alternative fashion. So what you're saying is we're about to go on a holiday away. Posed Taro to Rias. A trip, but not a holiday, Rias responded. Where I'll be with my main boys. Kiba and Gasper. Taro asked. Sure, answered Rias. Why are we your main boys? We've literally never hung out together in a recreational environment. Kiba murmured in the background, but was ignored. And this trip will compose of me being alongside several beautiful women? Taro inquired. I suppose so, Rias retorted. My word, so what you're saying is that we're going on a lads tour. Lads on tour. Lads on tour. Lads on tour. Rias chanted wildly, jumping up and down in his seat and pumping his fists in the air. Why are we taking public transport? This is so low budget. Getting the fucking train like I'm a fucking peasant, Taro complained. It's raining and I don't want to get my hair wet. Otherwise, we'd be walking up the cliff face that we're instead traveling up by public transport, Rias told him. Why couldn't we have got a private car or a private plane? Isn't your dad rich or something? Taro continued to whinge. But you wouldn't gain anything from that. The walk would have improved your stamina, but this will improve your endurance too, having to put up with the confined spaces of being on a train and having to stay standing on this train for 2 hours, Rias responded. My stamina is fine, I'm happy to show you that any time, Taro retorted with a cheeky wink. My, said Akeno, from behind him, with a chuckle. The train was packed to the brim with passengers. When they first got on the train there were a few available seats, of which they gave the weaker and smaller club members, with Asia, Gasper and Kaneko occupying seats. The rest were forced to stand. After passing through several stops the train had steadily filled, with the train now so crammed there was a risk of the train's content spilling out. Spilling out like boobs out of a bra that's too small, Taro thought to himself. He was jammed into such a tight space that he could barely breathe, not that he was complaining about his positioning, between Rias and Akeno, feeling their body cushions pressed against him on both sides, hard pressed against both of his elbows. Such considerations were enough to make his mouth water. He's got that look in his eye again, Rias, Kaneko giggled. Yes, the look he gets when he has lustful thoughts. It's like when Rias replied, but paused before finishing her sentence. It's like when Issei had similar thoughts, Kaneko said finishing Ria's sentence, and the two smiled at each other as they fondly remembered their lost comrade. Whilst they temporarily found themselves lost in a past moment, Rias recovered herself and reminded her friend that as much I'd love for someone to take me back to where it all began, to where our memories grow, we need to live for and remember these days. Akeno nodded in agreement, but with regret and hesitation in her gesture. The train began to enter through a period of turbulence, and Taro seized upon this golden opportunity. He decided now was the time to draw on his research, taking inspiration from that hentai where the male protagonist accidentally sexually harasses 4 women on a train, with these women later turning out to be his new live-in tutors, with all eventually having coitus with him. Not that he, or I for that matter, would know anything of such things, for one is not the type of fellow to engage in the viewing of hentai. Both Taro and I were told of this particular hentai by a friend, okay? As the train shuffled from side to side, Taro attempted to give the impression and that it had thrown him off balance and that he was now reaching out for support to stabilize himself. He let his hands wander in their search for balance. He threw himself around in unison with the train. When the train fell to one side, he'd move with it. When the train fell to the right, he'd do likewise and use his right hand to cup one of Ria's breasts, making sure to accompany this with an "oh, sorry." When it went to the left, he moved in the same direction, but this time his left hand fell onto one of Akeno's, also accompanying this with an apology. Rias moaned in response to his hand, whilst Akeno replied with a giggle and a my. After several repeats of this routine, the train finally entered a more consistent environment where its tendency to shake from side to side coming to an end. This incident culminated in the train reaching another stop, with more people getting on the train. Sorry about that, girls, I just couldn't keep my balance, Taro explained to the two. Really, because it seemed to me that you were rather enjoying that. I think you might have been forcing all those movements yourself, Rias said with a wry smile. I'm outraged at that suggestion, I am no liar, Rias. Taro responded in a hushed shout, and what makes you think I was enjoying it? Well, other than the smile on your face and the look in your eye, another telltale sign has also come into play, Rias informed him. How so? Taro asked. More people have just got on the train, forcing Akeno and I inwards, so that we've now both been thrusted against you and against each other. We are both able to feel something poking about between us that symbolizes you may be enjoying something, said Rias. For all you know that could be my gun, Taro replied, whilst also attempting to cross his arms in a resolute fashion. You told me that you had your gun license revoked, Akeno retorted with a playful smile. True, Taro began, all cards on the table. It's not my gun. After a long and arduous journey, they finally arrived at their train stop. The Occult Research Club had to make the final part of their journey, on foot, in the rain of which didn't look like ceasing its downfall anytime soon. They trekked to the summit of the hill they had been dropped off at the midway point of. Upon arriving at their accommodation, Rias allowed her team the opportunity to dry themselves off, but the chance to have a hot bath was put on hold for the time being. As they needed to get some training in whilst it was still relatively light outside, even with the grey clouds blocking out much of the light. The club members gathered outside of the accommodation, a building with only a ground floor, but still containing many rooms, for it was a large building width-wise. Rias faced them and said. As there isn't much time left today, we'll just settle for some basic physical exercises to get us warmed up. I want 100 laps around the summit, followed by 100 press-ups, and then we'll start giving you weight to carry when you do it. Nah, you're alright, Taro replied and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Where did he go? Zenobia inquired, matching her teammates in their frantic looking around. That bastard's gone and bailed on us, said Kaneko infuriatedly. Should we activate the sigil? Akeno asked Rias. No, we'll wait until he gets back. I want to see him suffer for this, Rias responded, anger etched across her face, with fire burning in her eyes. 2 or 3 hours later, when training was finished and those who had partaken were now settled in the warmth of inside the accommodation, their resting was interrupted by the sound of someone whistling. The sound seemed to be getting closer, coming up the hill. Then the knock on the door echoed through the room. Rias slowly got up and carried herself to the door. She opened the door a crack and peered out. As she looked at the being on the side of the door, she was filled with rage. Alright. Taro said, on the other side of the door. What were you trying to pull today exactly? Rias barked at him. I just didn't fancy it, to be honest, Taro replied, but I bought gifts for everyone, holding up a large carrier bag in his left hand. You may come in and give people their gifts, but afterwards we are going back outside to receive your punishment. You had me worried sick. What if you'd got hurt? I'm sorry, I was selfish and it won't happen again. You better be, yes you were, and it better not. Rias stepped out of the way of the door, giving him entry. Taro went around the room handing out presents, with most of these presents being very cheap and food-based. He eventually came to Rias and handed her a small black box. Rias opened the box and found a diamond necklace. Ah, I see, so he went down the jewelry route in an attempt to rectify his error of judgment. A craft move, Kiba said. I knew she'd be the most pissed with me, so I ending up using most of my budget on her present, Taro replied to him. It's beautiful, Rias said, her eyes lighting up as she gazed it, but it's not enough. You're still in big trouble, young man. Taro cursed. Come outside so I can give you your punishment, Rias instructed Taro. Come on, Rias, can you really be mad at me? Taro said, strolling up to her, clasping her hands and staring into her eyes. If you try and use your eye technique on me you'll be sleeping alone tonight, Rias barked at him, closing her eyes and tapping the sigil on Taro's left wrist. He yelled as a burst of pain coursed through his body. She remained unsympathetic and told him to get outside. Now. But it's raining, he whined. Tough luck, Rias retorted. She dragged Taro out of the accommodation and pointed to the floor, get on your hands and knees. Alright, Rias, let's get freaky. Nice, Taro chortled, a wide grin across his face. Your punishment shall be 1,000 spankings. Wait, what? You spank me and I will either teleport your hand so you end up spanking yourself, or I'll teleport my own hand and spank you every time you spank me. Ooh, my, laughed Akeno in the background as Rias pushed Taro to the floor. I dare you to, Taro, Rias said sharply. Rias then brought her right hand down and crashed into Taro's rear end. Taro swore loudly in response. His hands subsequently appeared behind Rias and administered a simply treatment. Rias cried out and cursed in Taro's direction. I am your master and you are my servant. Stop this immediately, I demanded. Rias shouted at him. This routine proceeded to be repeated several times, with the rest looking on awkwardly. This is weird, isn't? Kaneko muttered. Yes, I do believe it is, Kiba responded in a similarly hushed tone. Eventually, Taro was willing to stop responding to Ria's punishment by giving her the same in response, and he took the rest of the spankings without making any more vocal complaints. At the culmination of his punishment, Rias sank to her knees to put herself level alongside him and wrapped her arms around him. "You know you make it very difficult for people to like you," she told him. "Nah, loving me is easy because I'm beautiful," he retorted. Rias ignored his reply. "I was genuinely worried about you. Don't do that again," she said and proceeded to pull him in closer. "And I'm genuinely sorry," Taro said with a lighter tone, enfolding the closest arm to her around her shoulders. "But you know you're still going to have to suffer through training. It'll just have to be a late night for you and I," Rias informed him, releasing him instantly. "Actually, I'm feeling a bit of an injury coming on. I think I've pulled my hamstring, so I don't think I'm in the right shape for such a demanding regime sadly," Taro said, pleading. "No excuses, you're doing this, and that's final," replied Rias, not tolerating any bullshit. Taro cursed again in response. A montage followed of the rigorous training program imposed on Taro, whilst the others remained inside in the warmth away from the ever-pouring rain that still showed no signs of letting up. Taro was put through his paces, being made to do everything he ran from in the morning. He had to do 100 laps around the summit and 100 press-ups to begin with. This was followed by the increase in weight that was earlier promised. It started off with a steady increase in the number of bags he had to carry whilst either doing press-ups or laps. When performing the laps around the summit with the increased weight, Taro attempted to cut corners by teleporting when out of sight, but Rias quickly became aware of his tricks and reprimanded him for it with another burst of pain from his sigil. "This is domestic abuse," he wept, caressing his arm where the pain had first originated from and where it was at its most intense. "We're outside," Rias responded bluntly. Taro continued to wail, whilst Rias remained wholly unsympathetic. Eventually, the additional move went from Taro having to carry luggage to having to carry Rias on his back during the exercises. Whilst such a change had its positives, either her legs were wrapped around his neck or her behind on his back, he was also faced with having to carry quite a bit of weight throughout these tough exercises, although he wasn't stupid enough to say anything about the increase in weight as one. "Shouldn't comment on a lady's weight. Is this that primary school thing where you're mean to the person you like?" Taro asked, fighting back the tears. "Nope, I made everyone else train like this too. You need to improve your stamina," Rias replied. "I would have been happy to show you how good my stamina later tonight," said Taro with a chuckle. Rias smacked him round the head. "No talking," she barked at him, although Taro was certain she was smiling. At long last, Taro's grueling training exercises came to an end and he was finally allowed to return inside. The others had stayed up to greet him and had even prepared food for him to warm him up after battling the cold of the rain alongside his fight with doing exercise. Rias looked on with a smile across her face, seeing how Taro had helped restore morale and replenish spirits. Her friends were smiling again. The Occult Research Club members crowded around Taro as he ate. Akeno sat to his right, gripping his right arm tightly and pulling it close to her chest, whilst whispering into his ear. From what Rias could make out from her attempts at lip reading, Akeno was saying something about either Taro spanking her spanking Taro, or both. Either way, Taro's eyes were lighting up with glee and surprise at what she was saying and giving her shocked looks. But she replied too with laughter. Roswis, Kiba and Arena sat across from him on the opposite sofa, but looked at Taro with affection and interest, whilst Zenovia and Asia sat to his left with similar looks on their face in Taro's direction. Asper and Kaneko had perched themselves at his feet, looking up at him. To see Taro truly accepted by the rest of the group after a difficult start made Rias smile. They'd found their new protector and the holes in their heart were no longer as deep, but they were still there. She could still feel the void and she still missed Issei intensely. As much as she adored Taro and was starting to develop feelings for him, she couldn't escape the memory of Issei after losing him so prematurely. Rias looked to the sky longingly. "Come back to me, my Issei." Across the room, despite the attention he was receiving from his compatriots, Taro merely feigned interest in what they were saying, whilst his attention drew to Rias, sat by the window. He saw the look of yearning on her face and the tears that had developed in her eyes. He nodded and thought to himself, my task is clear. I know what I must do. End of the part 1 here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.